The building circular, an iron cage, glazed. A glass lantern about the size of an analog. The prisoners in their cells occupying the circumference. The officers the center. By blinds and other contrivances, the inspectors concealed from the observation of the prisoners. Hence the sentiment of a sort of invisible omnipresence. The whole circuit reviewable with little, or if necessary, without any change of place. Jeremy Bentham, 1791. Panopticon, or The Inspection House.
Through much of his life, Jeremy Bentham envisioned an industrialized prison. One where a minimum of prison guards could observe a large volume of inmates, and in a manner so as to obscure the observation. Bentham saw this as a humane solution to the inhumanity of prisons, and the spectacle of punishment at the time. But to Michel Foucault, it was a cruel and ingenious cage.
They call it ALPRs. That's the language they use because they don't want automatic or AI or anything like that being associated with their, just because of, the press implications or the public implications of that. But they very much are using AI.
You are hearing YouTuber Ben Jordan.
Yeah, I'm Ben Jordan. I'm a musician first. That's like what I enjoy doing the most. But I'm also a scientist and a YouTuber.
And if you'd stumbled upon his work recently, you'd be familiar with ALPRs.
The classic LPR, the one that's been used for over a decade, they are just cameras that have OCR, optical character recognition. And it's kind of the same thing when you scan a PDF or something, and you could just highlight the text from the document. Just kind of like that sort of technology, which is, nothing new. And it just uses special infrared cameras and infrared flashes, so it could very easily pick up a license plate and then catalog it. And you could argue the way that it was used previous to Flock, it wasn't nearly as easy to track someone. So it was one of those things where it's if you had a car accident, you might be able to find where the cars went, or if you had some sort of serial killer or something, a judge could sign off on a warrant. You could actually find out, where this car went. And so I don't think that it was as alarming to the average person, even though it was still not a great thing. It definitely wasn't one massive connected system where the cop in Texas could ping an ALPR in New York or something like that.
So the difference just between ALPRs and Flock is really the platform, you're saying?
Yeah, it's a platform that brings it all together, and I guess under the guise of the platform itself, this third-party platform that does it, it really skips over a lot of Fourth Amendment protections that just, and I believe, it's my opinion, that the company understands this, and but if they get to an IPO, then they can cash out and let the stock market deal with that blow, with them having to scale back a lot of these things. Once even a conservative Supreme Court, if they look at something like ALPRs in a Flock type system, they're just going to compare it to Carpenter v. United States, where they've already decided, I think 2018, 2019, I think it was 2019 when the actual ruling happened, they already decided that pinging someone's cell phone location through cell phone towers past one cell phone tower provided the police with information about, possibly their sexuality, their religion, things that are deemed private and personal. And so without a warrant, you can't do that. And So this is that exact same thing happening. It's just using a slightly different version of technology to do so. So the most attorneys I've spoken to, which are unfortunately a lot, not that I don't like them, they're all wonderful people that I work with, but most of the attorneys I've spoken to also see it as a clear Fourth Amendment violation.
Mm-hmm. How accurate is the OCR and facial recognition on Flock cameras?
They don't have facial recognition yet. That's a whole other beast. That's a whole other project that's possibly going to be covered in the next year on my channel. But they don't have facial. They don't claim to have facial recognition. No, to my knowledge, no client of Flock's has access to a facial recognition algorithm. As far as their plate recognition, it's pretty accurate. It's the way the way that it works, it's really good at finding a square or a rectangle that is your license plate. That's probably the hardest part, honestly, because there's like rectangles everywhere. If you're thinking like you're a computer trying to find, a rectangle somewhere, even if you just like look across the room, it's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of rectangles here. So it's actually kind of difficult. Reading the text is usually the easy thing. That can be obfuscated with putting a mask of small noise. It's called adversarial noise, and putting a mask of adversarial noise over it, where a human being would still be able to read it just fine, but an ALPR gets confused. And shortly after my video on that came out, Florida put in a law banning it. So it's like, well, at least I'm getting laws passed.
The ACLU reports that Flock Safety has deployed nearly 90,000 cameras nationwide as of July 2025. Flock Safety themselves advertise 49 states covered, with 20 billion plates read per month. The scope of Flock Safety's surveillance deployments begs for comparisons to Panopticism. Roadway cameras log your daily commute. Parking lot cameras watch you enter the grocery store. And should we disbelieve that Amazon's Ring partnership with Flock Safety has ended, we would presume that it watches your kids walk home from school. A shadowy big other. In the words of Tolkien, a great eye, lidless, wreathed in flame. Foucault and Bentham correctly believed that observation changes the behavior of the observed. One doesn't need to affirmatively know that they are being observed to have their actions coerced. They only have to know that at any time, they might be. While Bentham may have well seen that as a desirable outcome, Foucault suggests that a surveilled society is an imprisoned one.
The celebrated transparent circular cage, with its high tower, powerful and knowing, may have been, for Bentham, a project of a perfect disciplinary institution. But he also set out to show how one may unlock the disciplines and get them to function in a diffused, multiple, polyvalent way throughout the whole social body. These disciplines, which the classical age had elaborated in specific, relatively enclosed places, barracks, schools, workshops, and whose total implementation had been imagined only at the limited and temporary scale of a plague-stricken town, Bentham dreamt of transforming into a network of mechanisms that would be everywhere and always alert, running through society without interruption in space or in time. Page 208. Michel Foucault, 1975. Discipline and Punish.
My name is Adam Schwartz. I am the Privacy Litigation Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Yeah, and I understand you've been on this beat for a while.
Yeah, so I have been working on police use of license plate readers for going on 20 years. I used to be at the ACLU in Illinois, and now for a decade I've been at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Flock is a kind of newcomer to the area, but at the EFF we have worked on Flock issues for several years.
So in what ways do ALPRs run afoul of people's rights? And I guess we should expand that to include the networks they're connected to.
I would say at their core, license plate readers are a menace to many of our liberties. It starts with privacy. If an adversary like the government knows where you are, they know who you are and what you've been doing and who you've been with. So we have thousands of departments across the country with tens of thousands of cameras collecting billions of hits. And this can paint a very detailed picture of, where you live, where you've been going, et cetera. Number two, this is a threat to free speech because police sometimes aim these plate readers at places where people exercise their free speech, whether it's a protest or a mosque or a gun show. And many people will be scared of showing up because they don't want to end up under the police magnifying glass. Number three, there's racial disparity because this is it's pouring gasoline, surveillance gasoline on the embers or the roaring inferno of the existing racism in our criminal justice system. Number four, while these things are sold to us in the name of public safety, we're going to catch dangerous criminals, they actually endanger innocent people. There are many occasions where a police officer using a plate reader stops the wrong car, and people who are totally innocent find themselves on their belly in a parking lot with officers above them shouting and waving guns around. So this is not a technology that increases safety. It's a technology that creates danger for innocent people. So that's just true of all license plate readers. It gets worse when you have these flock and vigilant models where it's not just one department siloed, but rather it's all of the departments across America sharing.
Trigger warnings for police violence. With 20 billion plate reads per month and contracts with over 5,000 law enforcement agencies, it's worth it to consider the possibility of platform-side failures and the potential for police violence. In 2024, Brandon Upchurch was driving home when he was pulled over by police. An ALPR provided by Flock Safety had misread his license plate as one that had been stolen. After police removed Upchurch from the vehicle at gunpoint, officers threatened to release an attack dog on him unless he got down. As Upchurch kneeled to the ground to comply with police orders, the canine officer ordered the dog to maul him. The attack dog bit his arm, then latched onto Upchurch's dreadlocks, slamming his head on the ground. After learning that the plates on Upchurch's truck were in fact not stolen, he was charged with obstruction and resisting arrest. Not only were Mr. Upchurch's privacy rights violated, the encounter also led to physical harm. How easy would it be to track a civilian with a Flock network?
I mean, incredibly easy, especially if you live in a place that has a lot of cameras. You could literally, if you wanted to, you could tell where I've gone in the last week without any problem. You could just find a map of, you could just have it drop a map of every single place. It was as if I had a GPS or something like that on my car that was tracking me. Obviously, if you live in a place where you don't have that many Flock cameras, it's harder, which it is strangely a nice feeling now when I travel somewhere where I only see one or two in a town. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I feel better just knowing that I can go to this gas station and go to this Waffle House and not have someone know about it.
Hence the major effect of the Panopticon, to induce in the inmate a state of conscious and permanent visibility that assures the automatic functioning of power. So to arrange things that the surveillance is permanent in its effects, even if it is discontinuous in its action. The perfection of power should tend to render its actual exercise unnecessary. That this architectural apparatus should be a machine for creating and sustaining a power relation independent of the person who exercises it. In short, that the inmates should be caught up in a power situation of which they are themselves the bearers. Page 201. Michel Foucault, 1975. Discipline and Punish.
For a long time, we have been losing the fight against 24/7 government tracking. Between app permissions, data brokers, and third-party doctrine, the state already has a pretty good real-time profile of where everyone is and what they're doing. ALPR networks only add to the danger that such profiling creates, and Flock Safety isn't the only player in this space.
There are at least three major vendors in the country of license plate reader services. Flock is the one that has been most notorious for the past year. But a couple years back, the one that was the most notorious was Vigilant, which is still in the game. And a third company that is in this game also is Motorola Axon. They all are providing license plate readers. They're all providing cloud computing. They're all of great concern. So it's good the public is concerned about Flock, but we should more generally be concerned about all license plate readers.
What are some other tools that the state has used to surveil rallies and protests?
Stingray is one of them. I mean, Stingray, Kingfish are like the two brand names, but they're IMSI catchers, and they basically they clone a cell phone tower, and then your phone connects to it because it has a stronger signal than the real one, and then they downgrade you to 4G or 3G, which kind of gets rid of the modern security protocols, and that allows them to identify you, track you, and find your location and stuff. And yeah, I mean, that's something the EFF has released a tool called Ray Hunter, which allows you to modify a cheap used hotspot device to be a detector for these types of cell site simulators. And I've been working a bit to try and make something that maybe even gives you more information about one, or something where like someone could have a Wi-Fi adapter connected to like a Raspberry Pi in a particular area, and it would detect if one of those is being used and then notify social media or something like that. But to do that, I've had to, I don't know where it is, I have a couple of boxes of these things. To do that, I have to create an IMSI, right? And so I have to actually like set up kind of a Faraday cage situation, because they're very illegal to use if you're not a police officer or if you're not an ICE officer. But yeah, so to do that, you kind of have to set up your own cell phone network and then to do these downgrade attacks, so you could make sure that it's working. So it's a little more complicated than just creating something and hoping it works. You have to make sure that it's effective if you're actually going to have people deploying it in situations like protests and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I wish that I had a larger team and more time, because I would love to have that like ready tomorrow, but it's we're working on it slowly.
What is IMSI?
International Mobile Subscriber Identifier. Wow, I can't believe I actually got that.
Nailed it.
I was like, yeah, in the beginning of that acronym, I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this right. But well.
Is the use of an IMSI catcher on civilians without probable cause illegal?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Fourth Amendment, it is. I'm not an attorney, so I can't really give you any sort of professional. I can only give you like an armchair evaluation. But from what the Fourth Amendment says, and then from other rulings based on technology, yeah, anything that tracks your location as you go to about your day-to-day life is a Fourth Amendment violation, because it can show the government things like religion, sexuality, etc. So the Supreme Court's been pretty clear about that. They just haven't covered this in particular yet.
Yeah. What kind of effect would this kind of surveillance have on the exercise of free speech? Should we be concerned with engaging in lawful activity while being monitored? Like, is there any reasonable concern for that?
Yeah, I mean, so just to start with Foucault's Panopticon, the idea is that when the state tells the people that they are under surveillance, the people become their own police persons, and they refrain from activity that they don't want the state to disapprove them for. And this is not just a French philosophical theory. There's all kinds of studies that show that in fact people behave differently if they think that they are under scrutiny. And in the case of free speech, they stop posting on the internet and they stop showing up at demonstrations. And this is an idea that's recognized, in judicial interpretation of the First Amendment. That's one of the things the government should not be doing, is discouraging people from showing up at protest. Now, many of us can take the heat and show up at a protest and have the self-confidence that we can live with the state's disapproval and whatever consequences come. But many people are more vulnerable, and they fear deportation, they fear losing a job, they fear the disrespect of their neighbors, and they do stay home. License plate readers are just one of the ways that surveillance by the state has this harm, not just to privacy, but to the practice of free speech in America.
Mm-hmm. So obviously the juice ain't worth the squeeze. Does society even measurably benefit from these networks? I know police and flock safety regularly attest to the efficacy of their ALPR networks. Is there any data supporting their claims?
No. No. But that, I guess answering that as a researcher, there is not, but that doesn't mean that they don't lower, that doesn't mean that they don't work a little bit, or it doesn't mean that they don't make things worse. It just means that we don't really know yet. And the two ways of looking at that is, one, the way that they've done the data and the way that Flock points to the thing that they always cite in every single quote that they use, apparently, they cite a paper that sort of looks at crime trends between 2020 and 2024, I believe, or 2025, when crime went down nationally, whether people were using surveillance or not. Crime dropped dramatically in those years, but post-COVID and then down. That's on the FBI crime stats. That's all over the place. So inserting Flock into that and then saying, look what Flock did, you really would need a multi-city analysis. A large one. The larger the pool, the better. Obviously, you would need a very large multi-city analysis, and then you'd need to look at every single year when they were installed, where they were installed, and then, it would just take a lot more work than they put into this research. Which, by the way, the research that they always cite is done by Flock employees. It's not an independent thing. Literally, their Flock email address is on the paper, so it's not even that difficult to find.
Yeah, Marlboro scientists say smoking is okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess going a little bit deeper with that, we haven't figured out if increasing police reduces crime as a society. We haven't even figured that out. And you find out, you get into the granules, and you're like, okay, well, yeah, it seems like community policing is helping, and it seems like these other, just arming yourself with more weapons and more vehicles and more feet on the ground that are probably not paid as much as they should be for the amount of responsibilities that they're granted, then yeah, that might not be lowering crime at all. And then the final way of looking at that, a few years ago, I did a video, something just came across my news feed saying that there was an AI algorithm at University in Chicago that solved crime with a 90% accuracy in particular areas that it scanned all the data from. And I was like, okay, well, I'm from Chicago, so I went to Chicago and met with the head of this project, the professor of sociology at University in Chicago, and his team, and the neighborhood that they were analyzing was right next to the neighborhood I grew up in, which is one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country, and West Englewood. And they were looking at Englewood, and obviously one of my first criticisms was that the neighborhood was 15 minutes away, and nobody from the research team had been there. Which was I'm sorry, so you've been spending years on this project, yet you've never actually just driven through the neighborhood? Why? Because it's dangerous, I guess? Why would you think that would be okay? But throughout that, I was like, okay, well, yeah, this is impressive. I sort of got to understand how their model works. Then I went to that neighborhood, to a nonprofit there, and I spoke to them about it. And I was like, okay, what do you think about, you've heard about this. You've been a participant in quite a few studies now that about things like this. And yeah, basically I was talking to this nonprofit run by women whose children have been killed by gun violence. And just basically everybody who's a member of this nonprofit has lost a child to gun violence in that neighborhood. So very dark stuff. And and their purpose it's called Purpose Over Pain. And their entire thing is if you're in a gang and there's a gang shooting or something like that, you can call them. They have a hotline. You can call them. They know the area. They know the people in the area. They know the gangs. They know the politics. They know, what's going on with the cops. They know who's dealing drugs. And you talk to them and they just try and reduce violence. Like they just try and explain the consequences and explain, all the different ways you could deal with it. And so it was amazing to me because they were like, well, we can predict crime even better. And I was like, how? And they're like, by talking to people. So that kind of got me understanding how ridiculous it is to ignore a community with community policing, to like not have massive amounts of resources going into working with a community with what they were, not busting them, not arresting them, but just working with them, opposed to having, an AI algorithm scan it. And so circling back to the flock thing, what you end up with is a community where people will go through stop signs more often, and that'll be included as a crime. And sure enough, if you put cops somewhere in a particular location, you'll find more crime there because that's how it works. And then, however, that cop could be somewhere else where somebody might be assaulting their family member or something like that. But there's no cop there to notice it. So, I mean, but can you have this conversation with a group of legislators? Not really. Like, that's the issue, is like, so, because one thing I've been trying to do now, if any sort of time I'm on a soapbox about a problem, is like, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? What are they going to do about it? Like, and that's when it gets really complicated, because I've talked to plenty of legislators and nothing's been done. So,
a real subjection is born mechanically from a fictitious relation, so it is not necessary to use force to constrain the convict to good behavior, the madman to calm, the worker to work. He who is subjected to a field of visibility and who knows it assumes responsibility for the constraints of power. He makes them play spontaneously upon himself. He inscribes in himself the power relation in which he simultaneously plays both roles. He becomes the principle of his own subjection. Page 202, Michel Foucault, 1975, Discipline and Punish.
Yeah, I mean, well, we know that people behave differently when they know that they're being observed. That's 100 years old, that we figured that out, and we've been studying it ever since. And that's a sociologist's favorite thing to study. Even in college, it's like a very common thing. So, like, obviously, the one side of that is, yeah, it is a crime deterrent. I imagine, you're less likely to commit a crime in front of a police camera. That being said, like, not all crimes hurt people. Not like, when you get pedantic with laws, like, yeah, I mean, so it does change people's behavior if they think that the police is watching, or if they think that they'll be suspected of a crime. If maybe they might be wearing something when they're passing the camera that makes them, more likely to get stopped by a cop, a few blocks away. So, I mean, that already changes behavior. But then there's the other side of it where, would you be comfortable practicing imitating a laugh that you heard from a movie in front of a surveillance camera? Well, no, because someone could use that against you in some way, or embarrass you, or just knowing that someone else might be watching it is shameful. So you're not going to practice it. But that you practicing that might actually improve your social skills, or make a joke really funny at the office tomorrow or something like that. And you could continue down this rabbit hole where, like, well, okay, so the first time you solder something, did you have somebody, which is something I tend to do a lot with this type of work. When I first started soldering something, did I have somebody looking over my shoulder? Were people watching me and grading my soldering or making fun of it? No, like, I was experimenting and I was getting solder everywhere and I was burning myself and I was breathing in the fumes wrong. But I learned how to do it that way, and I got my own style that way. And by nature, I mean, like, the first job I ever had was a musician, and every instrument that I learned through on my own, without any teachers, without anybody showing me how to do it. And I defined my own style, and I made a living for 20 years based off of that style that I defined through my own finding. And, like, everybody has this in them. And so, yeah, putting cameras places, And this could extend far outside of Flock. Like even if you, and even if you're like only looking at things through like a capitalist lens, and you own a pizza shop and you have a surveillance camera, on the people who are making the dough or taking the orders and organizing the orders on a board or something like that. Like, do you want them to figure out the way to do it that makes them happiest and where they could do it efficiently and experiment a little bit to get things done the way that makes them enjoy their day the most when they have to have this stupid job of working in the pizza parlor, which I've had, by the way. Or would you rather them do it the way that you told them to do it and they know that you're watching, so they only do it that way? Because one of those ways that a person will stay with your company much longer and you won't have to train somebody else. One of those ways, they'll actually probably find a more efficient way to work and they'll get more work done faster. The other way, they'll do the thing that you told them and they'll be scared that you're seeing, or they'll just appear to do the thing that you told them and they'll, and so like, even if you look at things like selfishly, it's like, yeah, this doesn't always pan out the way you want it to. Like you generally want to give people a little bit of breathing room so they could find out how they want to do things, and so they could personalize it, and you could find their strengths and weaknesses. So I mean it's definitely a deep rabbit hole, but generally, yeah, people need privacy. It's a human right, and you need it to be able to freely access your own destiny.
While the existence of the all-seeing eye of the state alone impugns our human rights, we also have to worry about police and network operator misuse of these systems. Police and network operators are just as capable of committing crime as any other person. Giving over this level of granular surveillance to anyone would predictably facilitate new avenues of crime and violence.
I mean, almost every few days, I hear about story just broke the other day. A secretary in a police station in South Georgia was using it to stalk people. She actually got arrested for stalking, like 2 counts of stalking. Yeah, I mean, it just happened in Wisconsin. It just happened in North Georgia. It's happened like, probably a half dozen times in the last month that we know about. But when you think about that, it's like, how many times are the cops actually arresting another cop for doing this or charging them, or, when they could easily just, not share the database or remove the reason that was put in there or change it to a criminal code or something like that. So I assume that it's happening. It's like a cockroach where if you see one in the kitchen, there's a whole community of them, under the cabinet somewhere. So I feel like it's a lot like that, unfortunately.
And it's not only surveillance by the state that we need to worry about. As shown by Benn's research, some ALPR networks stream their data to the open internet in an unencrypted format. In some locations, passing by an ALPR network can expose you to attacks by malicious actors.
I've found accounts for sale on the dark web, which was one of the things that made me ask, how are these insecure? Like, was this, was a cop selling them to someone in Russia? And then it was, or what was the deal? And then that's when I started finding all these insecurities in the system and or vulnerabilities in the system. And so I guess, like, if you follow the way that this type of thing actually works, and usually works, is like if you have data leaking to a hacker, let's say in China or Russia or whatever, and then that data ends up being sold on like a data breach market, which is still a black market or whatever, it kind of gets like washed in a way, and then it ends up with data brokers. Like, that's the way this always works. And so, for example, like one of the ways I was able to demonstrate to a lot of other journalists, and even, at one point in my channel, was if you go through one of these ALPRs and you go through these plates, you could easily cross-reference somebody's license plate. You don't even need access to the police database of license plates. You could just cross-reference that with the Park Mobile data breach, which has people's home addresses, credit card numbers, everything. And then you could find out, like, where that person lives. And then you could, if you have access to those ALPRs, then you can actually begin to track them. And there's a lot of services, there's a ton of them. I don't even need to name one, but I mean, I was about to name examples, but I'm like, there's so many, like, there's just OSINT, open source intelligence services that do this for you, that map all this stuff out in a way that's really easy to use. So you don't even have to really be that that big of an innocent person to be able to do it. So anyway, point being is that like if this is ending up in the wrong hands, and if this is ending up, being resold on the dark web, then it's going to end up being in commercialized data in one way or another. And FOC themselves had been caught buying dark web data from breaches and putting it into their own FOC Nova system. So it's like the difference between hacked breach data and legitimate, user data that's been shared or sold is non-existent.
So why does Garrett Langley hate you so much?
I imagine that. I mean, I'm very careful with like the way that I phrase things, obviously, because I don't want to like state something as if it's fact. I assume that he's just trying to get his company to IPO, and I assume that security issues are playing a major problem in increasing the company's valuation. And I am one of the people who is discovering these security issues, and I'm probably the most prominent voice in pointing them out. But I've been very careful to make sure that, if something happens to me, if there's some frivolous reason why I end up behind bars, or if I get some terrible thing, that will only be amplified. And so I've been very careful about that, sort of like a dead man's mechanism type of thing with other media outlets.
The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Could you provide us a summary of United States v. Jones?
Yeah, so in the olden days, just a generation back, if police wanted to surveil somebody, they had to consume a lot of shoe leather. So if they wanted to know, what Adam was doing, there would be a stakeout with, 3 pairs of officers and 8-hour shifts following me around, or, sitting in a car and watching my bedroom. The technological revolution we're living through has changed this, because now it is easy with these new technologies, which are automated and labor saving, to keep track of people. So, in Germany under communism, the Stasi, had created a network of 20% of the adult population was helping spy. But now it's all just, on the internet and available to be harvested by data brokers and sold to the police. So Jones is one of a handful of Supreme Court decisions in the last 15 years, which have recognized this revolution in technology, and say police following people around in a squad car is just not the same thing as police putting a GPS device on someone's car and letting the robot, do the work for the human police officers. And so what Jones says is that, yes, for a century we've said what people are doing in public and exposing to anyone who is in public, including the police, is not a private matter. And so police are free to watch what people are doing in public. But digital is different. When the police take a GPS device and stick it on the car, and the tool is doing the work of following someone around, that is a search that triggers protection. And typically that means before police are going to use these tools to track our movements, they need to get a warrant.
So how does combining ALPR technology with geolocation data interact with the decision in United States v. Jones?
Yeah, that is a question that's being asked in courthouses across America ever since Jones came down. And Jones should be paired with another case called Carpenter. So Jones, I don't remember exactly the year, but it's more like 2010. I'm embarrassed not to know exactly. And so Jones is cops putting GPS devices on cars is a search. And then after that, more like, again, I'm guessing the year, it's about 2015, the Supreme Court in Carpenter says it's not just GPS devices, it's also the police getting cell site location information. This is, our phones are constantly pinging against cell towers to know where you've been. And so the question then is, well, if it's GPS devices and cell site location information, what else is it? And so courts across America are saying, is it also license plate readers?
Mm-hmm. So one could safely assume that police who use ALPR platforms like Flock Safety would cite Smith v. Maryland as a legal basis for implementing these platforms. Could you summarize Smith v. Maryland and what the third-party doctrine is?
Yeah, so the third-party doctrine was created in the 1970s, and it's one of the worst legal doctrines there is under our precious Fourth Amendment. And what it says is, if you give your data to a third party, for example, you write checks and now the bank knows where your check went, or you make a phone call and now the phone company knows who you called. By giving your information, who you wrote a check to, who you called, to the third party, the bank or the phone company, you have waived your privacy interests. And so when the police go to the bank or the phone company and say, give me the records of your check writing and phone calls, under these bad decisions from the 1970s, that is not a search and therefore does not require a warrant. One of the things that's so wonderful about Carpenter is that the Supreme Court said, yeah, that might be good for checks and phone records of who you called, but it's not true for cell site location information, which is just involuntarily living in society. You're walking around with a phone, and that phone is constantly pinging against all the cell phone towers. That is viewed by the Supreme Court as different from voluntarily calling somebody.
And that was decided in Carpenter v. United States.
Correct.
Yeah. Which was my next question. How does third-party doctrine stand up?
Yeah. So what we've seen. So the third-party doctrine is this Death Star that is created in the 70s and is still out there and just trying to blow up privacy protection under the Fourth Amendment. And Carpenter represents a cutting back of that Death Star, but not the blowing it up. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, those of us who are privacy advocates whose lifeblood is the Fourth Amendment, we hope for the day that we can fully repeal the third party doctrine. We celebrate that Carpenter has trimmed it, and we hope for more cutting it back.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about MATA v. Digital Recognition Network.
Yeah, so fortunately, we don't have to put all of our privacy eggs in one basket. The Fourth Amendment is the most important legal protection of our privacy, but we have other ones. We have a Congress and we have 50 state legislatures that can pass statutes that protect our privacy. California, to its great credit, about a decade ago, passed a law called Senate Bill 34, which imposes various limits on government and businesses in their use of license plate readers. And one of the provisions says that an entity that uses a plate reader has to have a privacy policy and enforce the privacy policy. The lawsuit, MATA, argues that one of the companies that is in this sector failed to follow that part of SB 34. Incidentally, well, I'll pause there. There's a question you might be interested in that comes out of the MATA case concerning whether privacy injury is real injury.
Yeah, well, in your article, Privacy Harm is Harm, you definitely make a compelling case. So,
yeah, okay, so yeah, so the a issue that cuts across all privacy law is what kinds of injuries you can bring to court. So is it narrowly, my privacy was violated, my data's out there, and someone got it and used it to steal my money or used it to stalk me and break into my house? Clearly, those are harms. There are some businesses who say that's the only harm. And if your data is processed in violation of a statute and you don't get robbed or mugged, boo-hoo, that's not a real injury. And so in all kinds of courthouses, we're saying, no, that's not true. There's a fundamental human right to privacy. And when a legislature protects that and a business violates that, you get your day in court. So the Mata case, which should be about whether or not a business violated an SB 34 limit on license plate readers, transmogrified into a lawsuit about whether the kinds of injuries that the plaintiff suffered, which is just a loss of their data privacy, is enough to get them into court. And the trial court said no, and that was appealed. And there's an amicus brief that the EFF joined that was written by ACLU of California and a clinic at Stanford University, which says privacy harm is real harm. Privacy harm alone is enough to get you into court. The people saying it's not enough, you have to actually be robbed or mugged, are mistaken. So hopefully that will get straightened out on appeal, and it will go back down, and Mata will get to the real issue, which is whether or not this company violated SB 34.
One fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific boomerang effect. The Gestapos are busy, the prisons fill up, the torturers standing around the racks invent, refine, discuss. People are surprised, they become indignant. They say, how strange, but never mind, it's Nazism, it will pass. And they wait and they hope, and they hide the truth from themselves that it is barbarism, the supreme barbarism, the crowning barbarism that sums up all the daily barbarisms. That it is Nazism, yes, but that before they were its victims, they were its accomplices. That they tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them. That they absolved it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had been applied only to non-European peoples. Page 36, Aimé Césaire, 1950, Discourse on Colonialism.
ALPR networks, IMSI catchers, AI-driven target packages, they're not new. These technologies were all first tested in the colonial periphery before being perfected and brought back home. A straight line can be drawn between the war crimes in Gaza and ICE operations in the US. The reality is, tech firms like Flock Safety and Palantir are global existential threats. The more we can do to remove their services from our communities, the less money they have to develop kill chain enhancements for deployment in the colonial periphery. Are such surveillance capital firms so effective that the state can presume that popular movements will be forevermore ineffective?
Well, I mean it's a good question. It's a big question. One thing that I always try to do whenever talking about like Flock or Palantir, all that, any of that stuff, one big difference with cell phones is that I can turn my cell phone off. I could leave it at home. I could put it on airplane mode. I could install Graphene OS, something like that actually has adequate privacy protections that are customizable. You could use ad blockers. There's so many ways that you could limit or just opt out of being tracked from your cell phone. Because what I hear a lot, and I've heard this from cops saying like, yeah, but how's Flock any different than your cell phone? It's like, well, I can leave my cell phone at home, period. That's it.
Yeah, I have control over it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I mean, that's a humongous difference. And that's not saying like cell phone tracking isn't awful and ridiculous, but we don't even need to go there. Yeah, I mean, if you're able to track people without a warrant, and if you're able to get metrics like that, you start to. I try not to participate in a slippery slope argument. Like I always have like a mental note in my head to be like, don't go on a slippery slope, because that's not an actual valid way of like figuring out what's going on. But man, is it hard when you know that protests are using cell site simulators and stuff. And then when you know that this data is being passed between government and third parties, and then you know that you're I mean, there's so much of it. Like you buy a new car, and most car companies now track you and sell your data, and that data may go to car insurance companies, which then will say, he's turning at a speed that's a little faster than we're comfortable with, so we're going to use that as a justification to jack his rates up, or we're going to use that as maybe a justification to not pay out a liability claim that because we know that he's been aggressively driving. I mean, and something that I repeat ad nauseum is like, privacy is just not important to people until it is. But like when it is, it's too late. You can't do anything about it. All your information's out there. You've been unfortunately, you have to do something about it before the consequences come in, because you can't take it back. You can't just like scrub all of the information, unfortunately. And so privacy is not important to most people until it is, until they maybe in 2026, hopefully not, but it's possible, because I constantly search and ask people around me in my life who are not like, taking the same pill that I am in this regard. I asked them, what would make you care? And like this Fox stuff, and some of them, they're like, yeah, okay, a playground with kids playing on it being observed by anyone makes me care. Okay, yeah, I'm actually pissed off now. Or, well, knowing that this particular woman goes for a jog in the woods at dusk every night at 7 p.m. Yeah, okay, that's creepy. I care now. I will never, ever jog on that trail as a result of that. Okay, so these are good things. But like, I think a big thing is like two things that are going to collide very poorly is states requiring people to register their identification with porn sites, and then a data breach, and then all of this open source intelligence information combining the data. How long is it before you're able to see your conservative representatives' Pornhub searches? Because that's on the menu, like that. Like all the cards are in play, and like that might be when people care, because they'll be getting divorced. It's like, it's a huge deal. Yeah, so I mean, I think that might be one of the areas where people say, okay, we need to make some legislation to scale these things back.
So obviously, it's not enough to just sit around and wait for the courts to rescue us from surveillance capitalism. What can people do to prevent ALPR networks from coming to their communities? Or if they're already there, get them removed?
Yeah, the good news is that for a year, there has been a grassroots revolt against license plate readers. And in cities across America, people have been showing up at city council and saying, we don't want Flock, we don't want other license plate readers either in our communities. And some communities, city councils have responded by not entering agreements with these vendors. Some have ended agreements with these vendors. And so, what people can do is tune in to, whoever the groups are in their community that are focused on, privacy versus surveillance, and team up, show up at city council, send your letters to the editor, send your letters to your city council member. A lot of city councils across America, there's scores of them, have been doing the right thing in the last year and taking a big step back from this license plate reader surveillance.
I mean, I think that in places like Oregon and Washington, you're seeing a lot of people being very, very, especially in small towns, people being very vocal. In Denver, people have been extremely proactive in Denver about getting them taken down. And at this point, it's one of those things where I'm like, is this politically suicidal for the mayor? Like, it actually is like a really bad look. If you just read the news about the Denver mayor, like this Flock thing has been like the hill he's died on. And yeah, again, maybe it's one of those things where people will see that and be like, yeah, okay, we can't politically afford to do this right now. But yeah, I mean, I think you just need to look at it from a tax dollar perspective. and know that it's costing you a lot of them, and if you have them in your city. And I feel like that's a language that most people on both sides of the aisle can understand. Is, you know, this, even if you just don't want to even talk about your privacy, but just talk about the efficacy, just showcase like, no, we need more testing. But number one, the number one thing and the most reasonable argument that I've come up with that I've been trying to get repeated over and over again is just ask, like if your city's hell-bent on this, ask them to hire an independent security vendor. Make Flock pay for it, or whoever, Axon, or whatever company is trying to court them for your tax dollars. They have to hire an independent security vendor, and they have to pass. You just have to set up a threshold that they can pass to be allowed to install cameras in your community. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of like the baseline, right? Like that who would disagree with that? Like, I've not found one person that's like, yeah, oh, that's a terrible idea. I mean, other than like Garrett Langley, but you know, any person who's working in legislation or a city hall or something like that, that's like a very, you have to get a license to cut hair. You have to get a license to serve a hamburger. Like, you know, so certainly you should have a license to put cameras in public that are monitoring the public.
It can seem like someone always knows who you are, where you are, and what you are doing at all times. The existence of tech companies like Flock Safety and Palantir, paired with the ubiquity of data brokers and cell phones, constructs its own Hobbesian Leviathan on the backbone of surveillance capital. At times, its power can feel omnipresent, omnipotent, and indelible. But to quote Ursula K. Le Guin,
its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings.
Well, that concludes this episode of the SRA podcast. Big thanks to Ben Jordan and Adam Schwartz. You can find Ben over on YouTube at Ben Jordan. And you can find articles by Adam on the Electronic Frontier Foundation website, EFF.org. And a special thanks to Dom for the reads. I've been your host, Jessie Ellum. We'll see you next time.